Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, the podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business, but without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual, and I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Paddy Mann. Morning, Paddy.
Good morning.
Morning. So, I want to ask the audience, have you ever hired someone and then discovered that their skill level is way below what you imagined? This happens a lot. The culprit is not effectively reviewing their capability to do the job during your recruitment process. As you'd imagine, this can lead to a lot of stress and frustration. So in today's episode, we're going to dig deeper on this subject. So Paddy, let's start with what kind of pain can we expect if we hire someone without the right skills to do the job?
Cool. Well, we often dig into the stress around all sorts of subjects. This is probably one of the more obvious ones because I think everyone's been in a job where they've been working with someone else who's struggled and hasn't been able to keep up, hasn't been able to do their part in the team, hasn't essentially been delivering the value that the team needed. In some cases, not delivering any value at all. And so actually, throughout our time in this company, it's an area we've been better at. We've found people who've got most of the core skills. But when I reflect back on many of the larger organizations that I worked in the past and some smaller ones, there were often team members there who, I don't know, they almost felt like dead weight. They were there, they were in the team, but they weren't delivering a high amount of value. They weren't someone that you wanted to have on your team. It was almost, acknowledged that you had this person, they would be there, but they would be, in some cases, not contributing, in other cases, holding you back, in other cases, actually, causing issues by creating solutions that are of a lower quality, by causing mistakes which are going to get picked up by the team and then by customers, causes all sorts of pain. And so it causes pain for the business, and it causes a real impact and stress for the other team members who are, trying to do their job and working to a high level.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, you say that this is an area that I think comparatively, relative to other areas that we've worked on or challenges that we've had in the business, something that we've been good at. But I think that's probably been a product of two things. One is that when we first made our first few hires, we didn't get it fully right, but also I think we were just terrified of getting it wrong. I think that in the past we've generally been on the reluctant side of hiring for various reasons, versus some business owners that I know that they hire really, really quickly and early and so on, which has its own set of problems. But I think as a result, because we were so worried that it would not do well, I think we did more research into how to make sure that we select. I think the other reason, and I don't know about you actually, but for me personally, I always felt like I wouldn't be very good at assessing whether someone was good at a job based on interviews. And I looked up to people that I kind of felt like were, the kind of people that would say, I'm good at getting a really good read of people. And I've met successful and unsuccessful business owners that both say that, where they say, I can meet someone, I can get a good feel for, just by how they serve me coffee or whatever, like whether, this person would be really, really great in my organization. Whereas I always felt like, nope, I don't feel confident enough. And so we did a lot to make sure that that was in place, and we'll cover, ask shortly about what do we do and how do we make sure that we do that, and how can businesses do that.
Let me feed in, because there is something that we did do wrong early on. So what would happen is we would have need to bring in an engineer or salesperson or whatever, and we would recruit them. And something that we are reasonably good at was finding out whether they had the core skills. And I don't think we did it in the most effective way back then. We didn't get as strong a candidates as we do with our updated process, which I'll share in a little bit. But we did get okay people, and being a small business at that time, it cost us so much. We were determined to make sure we made a good hire. So we started off well. The big mistake that we made was hiring for one role and then assuming that they could do other things that they said they could. And so we had instances, for example, where we would hire someone into a sales position, and we would see their CV. And we've also been speaking on this podcast about why CVs aren't the best things to be reviewing, but we'd see on their CV that they also had experience in marketing. And we're like, oh, okay, that's brilliant, because we've also got a marketing issue. We've got a big hole there. So we get them in and we get them in ramped up on the sales, and we've tested this skill during their recruitment process. And they get up to speed pretty easily. And then we go, okay, how else can we use this resource? Maybe they can help out in these other areas where I know they've got some experience. And that's where things started to fall apart, because while they did have some experience, it was an area of the business where, frankly, we hadn't put the right processes or expectations in place. And they were not in a position where they could simply take what they'd done in a previous role when they had been well supported and make it work for our business. And we hadn't, in that area of the business, worked out exactly what skills we needed or tested for it. And so, there's certain skills in marketing where you need to be able to write long-form articles or produce videos or whatever. And they're really different skills that different people have. And we hadn't tested for any of that. So this was someone who, it said that they'd done some marketing, and we thought we'd nailed it. We'd got two birds with one stone, but really we hadn't, and it led to enormous stress, because while they were, we'd hired them to do one job, they were doing that job well. They were being asked to do a second job at the same time, which they weren't equipped to do, which actually, if we were to have created a recruitment process and hired for, we might have not have hired them, because the skills that we needed were different, but we weren't even supporting that role well. And that led to huge amounts of stress for us, because we thought that it seemed like they were underperforming. Yet if you were really, thought about it, we hired them to do one thing, they're doing that brilliantly. They're underperforming because of all sorts of other reasons. And for the person that had been put into that position, you can imagine, they're getting cold sweats. They don't know what's being expected. They want to take on more responsibility. They want to deliver as much value as they can to the team. But yeah, we kind of screwed them.
Yeah, and I think it's as you say, there's various sources of stress for it. I think one of them is for the business leader is still weeks or even months into hiring that person, the stress around still not knowing quite whether the issue is that they haven't got the skills, or whether your managing of them has been insufficient to help them get the result. Because I think in some cases, people hire someone that has got the skills, but they don't give them the onboarding, the training, the support, the performance management, the accountability, the metrics, the clarity, and as a result, and processes and whatever, so that they can do a good job and that they can deliver the results. The challenge, of course, is that in some cases, genuinely, that person hasn't got those skills, and how do you tell the difference? And I think it's why it makes it extra important that you up front put those measures in place to make sure that you can assess that they've got the right skills, so you can be more confident that as long as you then provide the appropriate support and so on as you go on, that you can deliver that. So let's dive into that. So how do we make sure that we hire someone who excels in the skills that are needed?
Cool. Well, as you say, you want to have these things put in place on the other side. So once you've hired them, you've got the frameworks, you've got the the processes that they will be able to follow, the resources that they're going to need to use, the way of onboarding them so they're able to excel in their role. And obviously, this is something we're huge on. We've got loads of episodes on how to sort out your onboarding, how to get your processes in place. And the reason that we actually come onto recruitment later is because we would say, you need to get the onboarding in place before, and that clarity before you then look to recruit. So if you then want to work this out, the first thing you need to do is get really clear on what key skills and experience they need to bring to the job. And that is not necessarily the same as going, what's everything this person is going to do? So, for sales, they're going to have to do sales calls and write emails and so on, but they're also going to have to know about competitors and our products and various other things. And so there's a divide. Some of these are skills they need to be able to bring. So they need to be able to write well. They need to have good written communications. We shouldn't be starting from the point where they haven't, learned English, that they're not able to write concisely. That's an area where we would be looking at as a starting point. Same for talking to people on calls. They need to be able to bring enthusiasm to those calls. They need to be able to go passion. They need to be able to summarize points concisely. They need to be able to listen to the customers and so on. And so these are the skills which are definitely not universal for everyone that's going to apply for this job. They can be very difficult to teach, but they're also not specific to our company. So we're looking for people to bring those in. Whereas there's a lot of additional guidance about how we do it in our company, such as, there's a process for how we take each customer or each lead from that first conversation all the way to being a customer and beyond. That process, and even the script at high level of how you're going to conduct calls, and the templates for how you're going to follow up on emails for common questions, details about our products and our competitors. These are all things that we can provide to someone who has those skills. So they don't need to be an expert. They don't need to come in knowing how to create those resources when they don't exist. They kind of need to be there if we want to be able to hire at a reasonably affordable level. And so you split the two, and you're looking for the core skills that will really differentiate the great people from the mediocre, and the ones that are hard to train versus the stuff that you would want in place and you would need in place if you're going to scale up a team.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that I think it's so common that so many business leaders essentially have processes that for their recruitment that don't fully do that. Whether it's as you mentioned before, like what we kind of used to do, which was over reliance on CVs and you say that you've got this experience, kind of talk to me about that, rather than really demonstrating the skills that you're looking for. Which reminds me a bit like I think something that's probably so well known it's become basically a meme now, is a way of testing a wannabe salesperson is sell me this pen, and of course the a salesperson that's not very good will go, okay, well this is the best pen in the world, like it's it's got this cushion grip and a great sound when it clicks and all this kind of stuff. And yet what you're looking for is someone to say, well, write something down for me, like, can you write down your name? And if they go, well, I haven't got a pen, it's like, well, good news, I've got one and I can sell it to you. And I think, why do people like that, and why does that exist as a thing? And it's because what you're really trying to do is assess the skill of, in this case, a salesperson, of realizing and looking for how do I create or shine a spotlight on need rather than push and just describe. And I think what we found is, in fact, I remember some of the recruitment processes that I went through when I was becoming a management consultant like 15, 16, 17 years ago. I remember that I would attend these recruitment processes where they'd be like, how many tennis balls can you fit in an aeroplane, or how many windows do you think there are in New York? And in theory, those are designed to be clever lateral thinking questions, because the idea is that, particularly for that role as a consultant, it's about your ability to think around a problem and think laterally and take something that's very complex and doesn't have a good answer and create some constraints and so on. But of course, the fact that it's slightly ridiculous is what makes it become almost a source of ickiness, particularly I think in today's recruitment landscape. And I think instead finding the ways in which you can legitimately assess someone's skills for the role using something that is work related, doesn't require the knowledge that you can give them anyway, and is simple enough that they have a good shot of doing it, but equally isn't in fantasy land, I think is really important. In fact, I was talking to a business owner just yesterday who's a client of ours, and talking about their recruitment process for a particular role, And they, and we were essentially talking about like, so how are you making sure that you've got the skills? And they were taking me through like, oh, well, I get them to do, this specific activity. I give them this recording and that they have to then do this with it. And I'm looking for, can they achieve these things? And partly they had done that as a result of stuff that I'd spoken to them about sort of months before, which is fantastic to see. But like the difference that you create when that business leader becomes so confident that that person is going to be the right choice because they've seen the work that they can put out. They've seen them demonstrate the very specific skills that they're looking for, which comes back to your point around you have to be clear on what skills you actually are assessing for and not assume that they're good at things. But like when you do that, it becomes so much easier to make sure that people are going to excel, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and you're just giving that that challenge early on of hiring someone. Excuse me, of hiring someone and not knowing whether it was a recruitment process or the way you're supporting them. And we had a software developer that we brought in when our processes for onboarding and so on were not good enough. And what was brilliant was that we'd actually got our recruitment process sorted out at that point. And I had taken over 1,000 candidates to the end, and I'd been really sharp on making sure I was testing for the things that were really important for a software developer. So I knew that this person, I didn't care that he knew like 20 different languages. I didn't want him to tick every single box. I was looking for people who were really sharp at development, because I know from my own experience on other teams that it's these people that make things fly compared to everyone else on their team. And this person had clearly demonstrated it. And yet when he was in the team, he was struggling to keep pace and get things out. And that was, on the one hand, it was a very stressful time because we weren't getting results and I was having to do long code reviews in the evening. But what was great was I was actively questioning how I hired the right person, and I could go back to the recruitment process and go, yes, I know that I've looked at over 1,000 people and this person was shining through. It's not a problem that this person doesn't know how to code. I'm not going to be able to find someone who's 10 times better. There's something else which is going wrong with the process which you need to fix, and was then able to address that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that you put in place there that I think is unusual, I've seen some businesses talk about doing it, but I think it's still relatively unusual. It's kind of that mini project that we would have right at the end of the process, which is really interesting because sometimes we've had developers get through to that stage who are absolute rock star speedy developers, and then we've found that when they get to that stage where they essentially have to ask questions to evaluate the scope and the requirements, that it's important that they kind of recap their understanding, come with some thoughts and check that, go away, do some development, share that again to make sure that they don't go off on a tangent, and review that. And what's interesting is that you sometimes will get a rock star developer who will assume that they've understood it too early, and as a result go, oh yeah, I get it, and they go off and they're silent and there's no updates and no questions and no recapping, and what they create out the end, although they've been quick to develop it, they haven't done any of those check-ins, and as a result they've gone way off base. And in some cases, in many cases, we proactively push and go, oh, we've not heard anything, and we to see whether is it just a training or coaching issue. But in some cases, we've seen candidates who are actively anti that approach, and they're like, no, like leave me to it, and so on. And what a brilliant thing to learn in the recruitment process rather than 3 to 6 months into that hire, right? Because if you suddenly find like, oh, we'd have hired them, they'd have gone off, created something, they would have felt like they created something amazing and everyone else is slow, and yet we'd go, but you've created the exact wrong thing and we're trying to create X and you've done Y and all this sort of stuff. And so I think having that kind of, whether it's mini projects, role plays, having those as part of your recruitment process works in both directions, right? Both for you as the hiring manager, making sure that you've made a good decision and the benefits that you described, but then also for the employee, the confidence that they can have that, oh yeah, I've done a role play and I know I can do this really well, and as a result, when I'm then in the role itself, it becomes easier. Like in the sales side, we do one of the role plays we do is we call it a tricky customer
But
role
before
play
you go on,
conversation.
let me just take this
Sure,
a
go ahead.
couple of steps back, because I think we're jumping on, and these are brilliant examples. But essentially, just for the audience listening, what's the process that leads to us having these mini projects? So the first step that I described earlier, we're going to get really clear on the key skills and experience that they need to bring to the job versus the stuff that you can give them. Then the second thing that you need to do is basically set the objective for yourself of only making the hire when you feel confident that they have these skills.
Yes.
And then the third step is to work out what activities are needed to make you feel confident. And in the development role, as you've then shared with some a brilliant example there, is I'm looking to demonstrate that to see that they're a really smart and fast coder developer, that they can work themselves around logical problems really quick. But that's actually not enough, because I know that there's lots of other things that trip up a developer. So we have after the culture fit interview, we have an interview with the development lead where we'll actually get them to do some coding. We'll ask them various questions, but it's not enough. I don't feel confident at that point. So we have a mini project, as you've described, and it's like up to 20 hours. We do pay for that. And this may feel crazy to people who haven't done development, but this is basically the best practice in the industry for very good reasons. And we do often find people who have been excellent to the end of the mini project, and then you see some big red flags about the way they're communicating and the way they're interacting, and we've saved ourselves huge cost in terms of the cost of hiring them, in the pain it would cause to the team, by identifying those red flags really late in the journey. It wasn't possible to do without that mini project. So then really effectively. So that's how we do it in development. The whole process end to end. We've done a assessment of, we ask 3 questions to see if they're likely to be a good fit for a culture. We've then done a test where they go away and do some coding exercises to see if they're likely to have the right skills. We've then done a culture fit interview to confirm that they're a really good fit for our values. We've then have a interview with the development lead to see if they've really got the skills that we're looking for, but it's still not enough. So we then have a mini project, and it might sound like a lot, but that is essentially the fastest and most time efficient way for both people, for both our team and for the developer, to get to the point where we feel really confident that we're hiring an A player, and they also feel really confident in us. And I'll tell you what, when we get to the end of that process, we know that we're making a great hire, and the feedback that we get from every 90+% of the candidates is absolutely stellar, including the ones that don't get offered a job, because they feel like it's been a really positive experience the whole way, and they've often grown and learned as part of it. So that's how we do it as development. You were about to share how we do it in the sales to give a different perspective.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for sort of re-picking us up on that, because I think you're right. Like it's important that people understand. Like, we don't start with a mini project or whatever. Like, you go through those stages, and we can perhaps share a checklist with our recruitment, with that recruitment process, so people can see it in context. Because I think sometimes when you hear it like this, it just feels like there's a load of stuff, and actually it's a very linear process where we're funneling people as we go, and we provide prompts and quite clear briefing, partly to make it easy for us, but partly to make sure it's consistently delivered for every candidate, so that you can accurately compare. And so we can share some of those things. But I think, as you say, for sales, one of the things that I find really useful, so you mentioned that I've got various stages early on, with including getting them to write a customer email in response to an example question. So it's like a response. So we're looking for certain ability to think about what's the customer's mindset, what's the real problem that we're trying to solve here, and as a result, write a response that is both immediately useful to the customer, but also ask the questions to check some assumptions and those sorts of things. Whereas if they just reply with like, "Oh, our pricing is on our website," it's like they're not going to be a good fit, because it was a more complex question than that. But one of my favourite parts of the sales and customer success kind of hire type process is what we call the tricky customer role play. And it's funny because I think everyone assumes that a tricky customer is going to be like an angry customer. It's going to be someone who's like, yeah, I'm not happy about X or Y. And actually, in our experience, most of your tricky customers are not ones that are angry. They're, by comparison, relatively easy to deal with. You apologise, look to understand what their issue is, help them solve it. But the tricky ones are actually the ones that are struggling to follow you, and often don't follow you, and are like they're apologetic about it. They're not angry with you. They're just trying to understand, and they struggle. And so, I love that as a role play, because essentially I'm seeing, does the salesperson, does the customer success person, do they empathise sufficiently to start where the customer is, rather than just assume like, oh yeah, so if you're on our website, you can go here, like, so the customer's asking some questions, and they start apologetically, and it's like, oh well, you can go over here and you can do this and da 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 da. Like, if that's what they're doing, if that's what the salesperson, the customer success person, whatever, if they just run off and do that, they're not showing enough empathy, they're not asking enough questions, then I know they're not going to be a good fit. And so it's interesting to see how do they deal with that. One part of that, which I'm conscious I'm giving a little bit of a secret for our recruitment process. For candidates doing it, close your ears. There are some questions in there. In fact, if I tweak it slightly, it'll be okay. One of the questions, essentially, there isn't a good answer for. There isn't a perfect answer. Is probably more accurate. And so whilst the candidate will have done some research, there's no way that they can give an absolutely perfect answer. And so I want to see, how do they deal with that? Because that's the reality in real life. You can't research everything and have every piece of knowledge when you're in that situation. And so I'm looking for that in that role play. I'm looking for how do they deal with that. And it's interesting seeing some people who come super prepared, like they've done more research than I expected, but absolutely like that throws them, and they really struggle, and so on. And so, that doesn't mean, oh well, they're definitely not the right fit. I have to kind of explore that, but it is so enlightening and illustrative that if we didn't have that in place, like I'd be coming from such a worse position. And it's the kind of thing that you'd only find out days, weeks later, because the way it often shows up is that person, if they feel like they need to know everything, they never really feel like, they take too long to feel comfortable having calls with customers, because it's like, oh, but there's still so much I need to know. And of course it's like, well, actually you just need to know a bit more than the customer so you can help them and be able to agree that you'll go away and get some information if you're missing something. And so it's those sorts of things are really important to get out. But it comes exactly back to what you said before around identifying what's the objective, what's the skills that you need to be able to assess, and how are you going to capture that as we go through. Anything else to add before we move to a close?
No, I love the example. I think some people listening might be going, oh, do you really need that skill or whatever? And it's just about us identifying the skills that we've seen help people to excel. And that's ultimately what we're doing. We're basically finding ways to go, firstly, are there any red flags? Are they really going to flounder? If there's any attitude or whatever in one of those sales calls, then thank goodness we identified that and removed them from the process. But then there's going to be lots of people that kind of do okay and could have got further with more training. But this is what we're doing in A Players. We're trying to find the top 10%, given the amount that we're able to pay and the industry and so on. And so we're looking for those indicators that this is not just someone who's capable, but is a superstar. And when you create a team of superstars that are really good and really capable of growing and excelling in their roles, then your whole business is really going to benefit and fly. So it's not about just getting people that can possibly do it. We're looking to get the A players, and it makes a huge difference and solves so much pain, stress down the line, and just helps. You get the opposite. You get people who can fly and who you can help to grow with you and your business.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paddy. Well, in this episode, we've essentially been covering, if you don't make sure that someone's got the capability to do a job, it obviously creates a lot of stress, both for the employee, but also for you and the rest of the team if they're not up to the job, and even if you're just not sure whether they're up to the job. Ideally, you'd get to watch them in the role performing it so that you can go, oh, okay, yeah, have I got a sense of that? But of course, that's not possible. They haven't got all the knowledge that they're going to need. That's going to need to come later, and you haven't got that time. So to some extent, what I've described is working backwards to say, okay, what are the key skills? What are the key things that I need to assess? And what's an appropriate way I can assess that to make sure that someone's got the capability to do the job? Now, as regular listeners will know, we also run a weekly webinar on how to free up 15 hours per week and remove the constant stress of running a business without slowing down growth. The feedback we get on this session is amazing. Please do come along. It's typically every Wednesday at 1 p.m. UK time, but you can find out more and register for the next one at www.airmanual.co/webinar. And a final note for our podcast listeners, as a new podcast, we do need your help. If you found the content today valuable, please just take 1 minute to leave us an honest review, either 5 stars or 1 star, frankly, is what helps us. This will help the podcast get more visibility and help more people. And if you're on social media, please do like it, subscribe it, repost it. It makes a huge difference to us, and we really do appreciate every single one. Otherwise, until next time, have fun.